Well, as we've heard, China has made significant efforts to liberalize its economy and open up its markets, even before it joined the WTO 15 years ago. The state's presence in the economy has shrunk drastically. Average tariffs for WTO members have dropped from 45% in 1992 to 15% in 2001. Today, they're even lower at 9.8%. And China's trade-weighted average tariff has fallen to 4.5%. Meanwhile, it's opened up more than 100 different service sectors, including finance, telecommunications, and legal services. It also overhauled more than 3,000 laws and regulations at the central government level and many more at the local level. WTO spokesperson Keith Rockwell says that China has shown how being an open economy can benefit its people. He acknowledged China's efforts to help with development and to stabilize relations between member countries. He also says China has already become one of the biggest defenders of the WTO. So to discuss why China wants to have market economy status, let's bring in our panel. On set with me is Scott Kennedy. He's director of the Project on Chinese Business and Political Economy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And joining us from Beijing, current affairs commentator Einar Tangen. Welcome to you both.
Thanks.
Glad to be here.
Now, Einar, I'm going to start with you. We see that China is filing its WTO challenge in response to the US and EU not granting it market economy status, or MES. What's the best case scenario from China's perspective at this point?
Well, a legal ruling that would force both countries to basically knuckle under and abide by this. But it's a much more difficult situation than just that. You start to understand what we're talking about. You have to go to the numbers. Basically, in the last 15 years, you've seen the world more than double, from 50 trillion to 113 trillion in value. China, at the same time, has quadrupled its GDP. But in Europe and the US, it has been about 70%. This has had repercussions that we're now feeling. There's got to be some compromise between both of them. Neither side is completely pure. The U.S. has been engaged in all sorts of issues that would run contrary to WTO and could be, in fact, accused of being a currency manipulator. But instead, they've tried to change that around on China. On the other hand, China has a long way to go and is still trying to open up and deal with its markets.
Now, Scott, I'd like to bring you in here. Why is it so important for China to have market economy status? We already know that a lot of countries have already recognized it as one.
Sure. I think for two reasons. The first is reputation. China doesn't want to be treated as a second-class citizen, and so it feels that this article that it accepted when it joined the WTO was supposed to lapse, and it wants to be treated like everybody else in trade remedies cases. The second is that the use of non-market economy methodologies applies to about 7% of Chinese imports to the United States, which results in higher tariffs. So for both reputational reasons and for business interests, they want this to lapse.
Now, Einar, I'm going to bring you back in here. As we're speaking about these tariffs, currently tariffs on certain Chinese exports are based on third-party or surrogate country prices rather than the actual Chinese domestic prices. Give us an idea. How has that affected China's economy?
Well, basically, it's been the basis for anti-dumping duties by both the EU and the US, particularly on steel, paper, furniture, and such things. China is looking to normalize the relationships, but you really have this kind of contrast between different models. 15 years might seem like a short period of time, but the fact is, the way that China has developed is beyond anything that we've experienced so far, not only in terms of speed, but in terms of the actual model itself, this kind of central mix of central control and market economy. So there's an adjustment period as different countries look at these models and try to figure them out. What you see, 80 countries have basically said they accept this model. But of course, there's always going to be those who do not accept it, and generally it's because this analysis of whose ox has been gored. And for both the US and EU, they feel that they have been left behind and they, quote, need to fight back. Loss of jobs, political instability, economies that are sliding sideways, these types of things are impacting.
So then, as we look ahead now, as we're looking at what's going to happen next that could potentially really change the trade picture going forward, what are some of the outcomes we could be looking at depending on what happens?
Well, I think market economy status, that fight, that's going to the WTO, and that's going to take at a minimum a year to address. It could go to 5 years, depending on whether there's an appeal and then the seek of retaliatory tariffs. And that's, as we all know, watching the news, just one of many issues that confront the U.S.-China commercial relationship. And so we could, I think, regardless of who had been elected president in the United States, we were going to see greater tensions between the U.S. and China commercially. The question is, do we find a productive solution to those, or do both sides go too far and we get a trade war, which isn't going to be in anyone's interest?
And Einar, you mentioned China's readiness to be recognized as a market economy status. What are some of the steps that it's taken that have caused so many other countries to really recognize it as an MES?
Well, part of it is internal. I mean, in terms of reducing tariffs, opening up some of their markets and things like this, creating a much smaller negative list, creating more bourses that are working in. But China still has a long way to go. It's not a perfect situation, even by the estimation of Beijing. It's something that is in progress, but no system is perfect. Every solution creates new problems, and in particular with China, its success has become an issue. All right, and as the rest of the world looks on its success as a model, it does not necessarily sit very well with the EU and the US, as I keep saying. This is about a clash of who has done well and who has not done well. And this will continue to be the driver between these issues, political and economic, between the developed world and the developing world.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for now, but Einar Tangen and Scott Kennedy will be sticking around with us.